I'm John Prideaux, host of the Checks and Balance podcast from The Economist. Each week, we unlock the stories and the trends shaping American politics, joined by The Economist journalists from around the world, plus expert guests. We dig into the ideas, the data, and the country's complex history to answer the big questions about where it's headed. That's Checks and Balance. Join me today and start listening on Acast, your podcast app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
From NJ Advanced Media, welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. Joined this week, James Cratch and Brian Fonseca making his second appearance on the show. Gentlemen, how you doing today? How's President's Day treating you?
Not so great. I woke up to find out that the car battery had died in the parking garage across the street that the city of Morristown had us put our cars in. So I had to call AAA, but they were great. Came right over, jump-started me, and away we go. I'm
glad to hear you don't have another car disaster. We've already discussed one last week, I think it was, right, with you and cars. So that's good.
Yes, my Rutgers car store, yes.
Right, yeah. Excellent. All right, fellas, we got a lot to talk about today. I'm going to start here, though, because Rutgers at number 3 Michigan on Thursday. Here's my premise. If they win this game, I think it's going to be the biggest win in 40 years for the Rutgers basketball program. Here are my reasons. Tell me if you agree. First of all, the biggest, they've never beaten a team ranked that high. They're Michigan's third in the country. It'd be their first win against Michigan, obviously after last year. The Wolverines beat them twice, both at MSG and on the road. And also, most of all, I think the win punches the ticket for the NCAA tournament, regardless of anything else. I know they certainly wouldn't want to be in a situation where if they lost out their final 4 games, they would be sweating it. But I think beating number 3 Michigan would be the win where we look back and say, that's it. That ends the 30-year drought. Fonseca, tell me if you agree. Would this be the biggest win in 30, 40 years for Rutgers?
I think it would be one of the more impressive. I don't know if I would call it the biggest just because obviously the NCAA tournament didn't happen last year, but those 2 wins at the end of last year were easily the biggest given the circumstances. I don't necessarily agree with you that if they beat Michigan, they'd be a lock either, because obviously it's a big win, but at 9-11, 10, it's not. I think you have to get to 10 wins to feel safe on Selection Sunday. It would be a huge win in that they're beating a team that is one of the 3 teams who could probably compete for a national championship. Michigan is easily the best team in the Big Ten, and they're loaded across the roster. They play the best basketball. They look like an NBA team. It'd be the most impressive win I can remember. I would not say it would be the biggest win, though.
I got to feel like it's 97%, though, Cratch. I mean, where do you go on this? If they beat Michigan and then got, there's another quad 1 win. It's on the road. And I just, the other part of that, obviously, is I couldn't see them possibly losing their last 4 games, especially when you've got, a couple teams on there that they've already beaten. What do you think, Cratch?
No, I think it would be a win-and-in scenario, especially since assuming they beat Nebraska, which I think we all assume they're going to do. I believe Nebraska might be a quad 2 win potentially
really
now.
Wow, okay.
Because they upset. Could they move up to quad 2 after beating Penn State?
They were really down the list. I think they were like 160 in the net. They're
Nevertheless, I think that if you beat Michigan and you win that game, even then, I still think beating Michigan, it would be one of the biggest wins ever, because we know the history with Michigan. And not only have they never beat Michigan, but, obviously they had never beaten Michigan State, but Michigan has kind of tortured Rutgers in a way that Michigan State never did. The Final Four, the NIT, last year, preventing 19-0 at the rack. So it'd be a huge win for them, and I think a win that would really kind of hammer it home. I think it also would, in a sense, lift up. I know there's been a lot of debate and discussion about the fan base and how they're kind of approaching this team and the expectations. To beat Michigan, I feel, will kind of really add some energy and excitement about the team going forward. Because to this point, look, I think it's always going to be unfair because you were so close last year. It felt like you went through all of the Renaissance stuff, but you didn't get the conclusion. You didn't get the payoff.
Right. And
now I feel it's just kind of like this drudging, this long trek to get the payoff finally. I do think it would sort of feel like last year again if they upset Michigan.
One reason why I sort of like their chances again, I watched some of the Michigan playing that Wisconsin game down. First game in 23 days, you think, all right, this is not going their way. They're down 14 points. Just come storming back in the second half and look like, as Fonseca said, borderline NBA team. One thing I do like about this, Brian, is I think this Rutgers team plays better when they are quote unquote the underdog. They'll have that chip on their shoulder. No one's going to expect them to go in there and win this game. as good as Michigan is, you think they've got to have a day somewhere along the line where they stub their toe. I don't know. I feel like this could be an opportunity for the Scarlet Knights. What do you think? Can they pull this one off?
They can. I don't think they will. I mean, the recent history says they've lost their last 4 games against top 20 teams on KenPom. And like you said, I mean, you'd think that Michigan would have an off day at some point, but they haven't really shown that this season. I mean, and the thing is, Michigan is so loaded with talent that if their top 2 guys have an off night, they have another 3 guys who can back them up. They have very few weaknesses. I mean, aside from turning the ball over a lot, they really don't do many things poorly. They're a great defensive team. They shoot the lights out. I mean, they have a great point guard, Mike Smith. There's so little holes in this Michigan team. And while I agree with you that Rutgers does play better when they're an underdog, I don't think there's enough juice here to kind of, I would be very surprised if they pull off the win. And
obviously everything would have to come together, Crash. I mean, but the one thing we'll say, at least this looks like a Steve Peichel team again, and by that I mean they're playing good defense, they're rebounding, they can't shoot for what, but that's the old school Peichel team. We saw that kind of effort against Northwestern, obviously one of the 2 worst teams in the conference. Cratch, what do you think the Rutgers would have to do to pull this upset?
I think the biggest thing is they've got to keep Miles and Cliff out of foul trouble. Have to do that. We saw it against Iowa. Boom, boom. All of a sudden, you're asking to quarter play big minutes. You just can't be held hostage by that, as we've said time and time again. I think they have to shoot better. Like you're going to have to shoot a little bit more. But I agree with you. Like the Steve Peichel toughness, the street fight, the Paul Mulcahy with the mask and the busted finger, like they need that approach. I think I agree with Brian. I don't think they're going to beat Michigan, but I bet you it's a really close game. Maybe the final score, maybe Michigan kind of pulls away late, but I think it's going to be a scrappy game, and they're going to really go and fight out there. I just don't think they're going to have enough to get over the hump necessarily, but I do think they're going to play well just because I feel like they've got that edge back, that Peichel coach, defense first, offense optional edge back.
All right,
just to add to some numbers to that, since they ended that 5-game losing streak, they've won 5 of the last 6. They've been the 3rd most efficient defense in the country per T rank. And one thing that Rutgers could really benefit from to beat Michigan is if Ron Harper Jr. just starts getting back into the rhythm from 3. I mean, he's in a massive slump. He's missed his last 19 threes. I think 39 of his last 44, something along those lines. And if he can get back to, I don't think he's as bad a 3-point shooter as he's showing now. Obviously, I think it's pretty clear he's not as good as a 50% 3-point shooter he was early in the year. But if he could start seeing the ball go through the hoop and have, get back in rhythm, have a hot night, that is one thing that could maybe give Rutgers a chance. But I think if Ron Harper Jr. does not play up to the level that he played up earlier in the season, Rutgers is always playing on the back foot against these top elite teams in the Big Ten.
Right, they do need another guy to carry them offensively. All right, let's just take this. Let's just play this forward here. Best case, worst case scenario. I was talking to Brad Watchell. I believe he is the best bracketologist in the country. Former Rutgers assistant coach, and he said he thinks that the Scarlet Knights could get as high as a number 5 seed, maybe 5-6 level. Right now, he's got them slotted as a 7. All right, so if this plays out the way we think it's going to play out, Cratch, and if they go 3-2 here or 2-3, they get a win in the Big Ten tournament. Are we looking at the 7 line for this team, 6-7 line, or is there a shot at something better? You think?
I think this team wants to be on the 7 line. That's just, I'm curious to what Brian thinks. I just think if you're a 7 seed or even a 10 seed, somehow right. you're getting usually a more manageable, game. And not only that, but if you win the first round game, and obviously that's, saying a lot since Rutgers hasn't been there in 30 years, you get a 2 seed. And I just think this year you don't want to be in a situation where you've got Gonzaga sitting there, in the next round. So I feel like getting a 2 would work. I saw that Brad said that. I was like, oh, if Rutgers gets a 5, I cannot wait for a week of like, oh no, 5-12 game, Here we go.
Some team like Drake at a 12, one of those typical underdog upset specials.
Like, here comes we're gonna get the UConn Stanford play-in game. They're gonna be hot. They're gonna have a game under their belt. First 4. Yeah, I think Rutgers wants to be a 7 or a 10 seed. That's why I thought the whole time is that way you get a week 2 because this is kind of a crazy year in college basketball. You get a week 2, and then all of a sudden you're in the Sweet 16.
Fonseca, you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd just be happy to get into the tournament, whatever seed that may be. I think the 7th seed is probably the most likely given the way bracketologists have been projecting it for the past couple of months. And it's led to some interesting matchup projections. Like I've seen Wachtel had Rutgers playing Seton Hall as a 10 seed. Someone, I think it was Joe Lenardi, had them playing Oregon, which has Eugenio Maruri on it as a 10 seed, which either of those would be super juicy first-round matchups that I think would give Rutgers fan base a heart attack within 5 minutes after Selection Sunday. So that would be interesting at least.
Let me just make this clear. There is no name that will pop up there as the opponent in any situation that won't give Rutgers fans a heart attack. I think
that's fair.
That it's pretty obvious. But there's many different scenarios where it would be more of a massive coronary than others, certainly. But I would love Seton Hall. That would be something great. 7-10 Seton Hall at Huey Pui's gym or at the
Indiana State Fairgrounds.
Indiana State Fairgrounds.
Actually, Seton Hall's like, can we take an NIT bid? Stay closer to home.
Yeah, right. That'd be something else.
I actually think I'm looking at it. I think UConn, I believe Brad had him as a play-in game. UConn would be a great first-round opponent. That would be a lot of fun. Seton Hall, I think Oregon would have a lot of juiciness to it. Although the Oregon thing, that I think would have, believe it or not, of the 3 we've mentioned, I feel like that could be the nastiest one. Yeah. Essentially, I actually think if I was Steve Peichel, I might be a little bit concerned about potentially drawing Oregon just because you guys are going to be excited. First tournament game in 30 years, you're all amped up. And then you throw in the whole Eugene thing where clearly there were some bad feelings, on the Rutgers side. I almost feel like that would be one of those games where you're worried about you're 5 minutes in and everyone's got 2 fouls and someone's gotten a technical.
Yeah.
You just want to slow down. It's crazy to think that Seton Hall might be the more mild, neutral kind of composed matchup for Rutgers in the
right. If you're Steve Peichel, you're rooting for some anonymous SEC team that no one imagined you'd be playing. You don't want either one of those.
1,000%. I think Steve would prefer anything that doesn't have a storyline because he's basketball, and the idea of talking about playing Seton Hall after they ducked you all season or playing Eugenio Maruri again is probably the biggest nightmare in his mind.
All right, guys, let's dive into true or false. You know the rules, Fonseca. I think you still know the rules. We're going to go through them, true or false. Then we'll talk about the end. All right, first one, true or false. The only thing that can stop Rutgers from making the tournament is COVID-19. Brian Fonseca, true or false?
False.
Cratch?
True.
I agree with you, Cratch. True or false? Steve Peichel has no choice but to stay patient with Ron Harper Jr., no matter how bad this slump gets. Fonseca, true or false?
True.
Cratch?
True.
All right, true or false? Miles needs the damn ball more. True or false? Fonseca, is Miles Johnson getting enough shots? Needs the ball more.
True.
Cratch, true or false?
I will say true, but I think we'll talk about it later.
All right. True or false? A Big Ten team will win the national championship this year. Brian Fonseca, true or false?
False.
Cratch, true or false?
False.
Oh, man, you're ruining the next one for me. If the Big Ten wins a national championship, that team most likely would be Michigan. Fonseca, true or false?
True.
Cratch?
True.
The next best option for a national championship out of the Big Ten? Illinois. Fonseca, true or false?
This is tough, but yeah, I'll say true.
Cratch?
False.
False? All right, we'll find out how you got in a minute. And finally, true or false? President's Day. The best American president is George Washington. Brian Fonseca, true or false?
False.
Oh, all right, coming out hot. Cratch?
False.
Who are you gonna go with, Cratch? With Ronald Reagan? I could see you in kindergarten or something with your American flag and Ronald Reagan. Who do you got?
Well, I think obviously Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, Lincoln won. Okay.
I think you could make an argument that it's John Adams, just simply because the peaceful transition.
Wait, but wasn't Washington who had to have the peaceful transition?
No, I believe I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, we have to delete this so I don't embarrass myself greatly. I believe it was Adams to Jefferson was the change. First time the party.
First,
yes,
right.
First peaceful transition.
Yes. Right.
Okay. I think so. Yeah, I'll say Lincoln, but I think you could also make a case for Adams.
Fonseca, you got a vote here. What are you going with?
Yeah, FDR. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue against the president who rescued the nation from its worst economic.
I like that. That's a good.
He was a compiler.
Just exactly. He hung in there too long. My wife is related to our second worst president, James Buchanan. So now my kids have James Buchanan's blood. How do you like that? Pretty impressive, huh? Yeah. All right.
Cool. Hey.
Okay. All right. So you both think that Ron Harper Jr. should stick. They can't put him on the bench. Can't try to shake him up a little bit. How do you feel about that, Fonseca?
I think you got to just let him shoot through it. They've been able to win games without him playing super well offensively, which is a testament to how good this team is, right? And I think he's more likely to get back into rhythm by just shooting out of this slump than sitting on the bench. And frankly, I'm not quite sure if they have a much better offensive option than him. I still think even the way he's playing, he's finding other ways to score, and he's the best option they have at the position where they're pretty thin at the 4 spot.
Right.
So I think it's good to keep him on the floor, but even if they wanted to take him off the floor, there's not really much they could slide in for him.
And he's been doing well rebounding. There's a stretch there against Iowa where I thought he was lethargic, running up and down the floor, really not moving as much as we saw earlier from the season. Not as much intensity. Different story against Northwestern. Kratz, you were iffy on the Miles D's the ball. What frustrated me is you thought in that first half against Northwestern, when he was getting fed that thing, he was virtually unstoppable against a bad Northwestern front court, and then they just went away from it in the second half.
No, what I was just gonna say is I totally agree with you, but at the same time too, his free throw shooting is such a liability that are you gonna get to a hack a mile situation?
I love it.
Down the stretch. Is that gonna become a problem for Rutgers? Yeah. Our team's gonna start using that approach. The more touches he gets, the more he's gonna end up going to the line. And we have proven that if he's in the paint and he gets fouled, the odds of you getting away with 1 or no points scored are pretty good than stopping him from getting the bucket.
We haven't seen that strategy. The thing is that college teams don't have enough decent big men to do that like in the pros. But yeah, it's a good point. Certainly late in games, that would be a good strategy. All right, anything else? So you don't think the Big Ten will break that streak, Fonseca? What are you going with, Gonzaga or Baylor, or who do you like?
Yeah, Gonzaga and Baylor are just so much better than everyone else in the college basketball that I would be stunned if they didn't win the title. Michigan is third in the country in efficiency margin on KenPom, and everyone fourth is Iowa, which is 1 point behind them. Baylor is 5 points ahead of Michigan, and Gonzaga is 8 points ahead of Michigan. The gap between those two and everyone else is an ocean.
When was the last time the clear favorite won the NCAA tournament?
Virginia in 2019.
Were they clearly the favorite? That was kind of they just lost the year before. Was everybody picking Virginia? I guess Villanova too. A couple years ago.
They were the clear best team in the country. I think narrative, I guess, was that they fell in the first round last year. Could they do it again? That's the narrative. But on paper, they were easily the best team in the country.
Well, it didn't happen. The best team didn't win last year. The COVID-19 thing. There you go.
It was a 353 team tie.
There we go. Absolutely. All right. Okay, let's move on.
Oh, just real quick.
What's this?
I know Iowa plays no defense, but that offense, they're so good offensively. And when you're playing so many games as tournament's going to be in Indianapolis in a football stadium, that can be kind of weird things could happen there. I could see this being some crazy year where Iowa can just offense its way to a title if we're going to talk about the best Big Ten option.
Right.
Because if obviously everyone's shooting is going to be impacted, but maybe Iowa's is impacted the less. Yeah. And Garza is so dominant that they might be able to. I do think Gonzaga is going to win. I feel like it's finally time for the Zags, Mark Few, to get a title. But
how many times has that been said over the years? But okay.
But the thing is, they've never been like this good. Like they've been like they should be in the Final Four good, but they've never been like this is the best team in the country good. But yeah, I just think Iowa, maybe there's some weird way that the defense doesn't matter this year and they just kind of shoot their way through.
A counterpoint to that, I agree that it's a weird year, so this might be invalid, but there's this thing that every national champion of the last 20 years, other than 2014 UConn, has ranked in the top 20 in Ken Pom in offense and defense. Like this has been a consistent thing throughout 20 years. Iowa's offense is number one in the country. Its defense is 108th. So, and Iowa's defense is bad. Rutgers had like at least 7 or 8 wide open threes, and that happened. And Rutgers is not amazingly efficient offense. If Iowa runs into a Gonzaga or another offense that can match them, that I just can't see them having a chance. To that end, the only 2 teams in the Big Ten that are currently in the top 20 in Ken Pom on both are Michigan and Illinois. So you nailed that, Steve.
You know what's good about having Fonseca on the show, Kratch, is that he brings information, like actual facts.
He does. As opposed to us, when we just kind of fire up the computer and just start yakking.
Yelling at each other. All right, let's move on really quick to football. I still think it's a good topic. It's just the recruiting success right now, or the recruiting trends we're seeing, Kratch. Stocking up on offensive linemen in this class. They've got commitments from a bunch of guys. And I think we're seeing what Greg Schiano is going to try to do there. A developmental program, he says that again and again. He's going to take big bodies, long, athletes, and he's going to get him in the weight room and hope that Jay Butler works the magic. I mean, is that what you think is going on here?
No, definitely. I think that, look, he would never come out and say it, but it's very obvious when they got here. They looked at, as anyone would have looked at this team and said, offensive and defensive lines, biggest weakness area, biggest issue where they're not up to Big Ten par. They made a major emphasis on adding defensive linemen in the last 2 years. In the 2020 recruiting cycle with the transfers, and in 2021, it seems like now 22 and 23, this is going to be about adding offensive line talent. My question is, there's still going to be like a gap year or two before those 22, and 21 and 22 and 23 guys are ready to go. I think they're going to have to use the transfer portal to probably fill in some gaps on the offensive line to kind of bridge the gap. But it's clear this is becoming the trend. They are focusing on 2 things overall from the 2 recruiting classes: speed and the trenches. And obviously they were emphasis was early on the defensive line, now shifting to the offensive line.
Right. And I think it's interesting that it's a piece of bad news, technically speaking, but also a piece of good news. They lost to Addison Copeland, for Western New York, Buffalo receiver, and the fact they lost him after, identified him early, they brought him, they got the commitment, and Notre Dame came in with an offer. That shows that they're identifying the right players. Obviously, you don't want to lose them, but I guess Todrick Hunt said that this kid's still considering Rutgers, so we'll see what happens. But it is a sign again that they are getting in on these guys earlier, getting commitments before the big ones come in and take notice.
No, definitely. And I think the good thing is it feels like the list of like schools that a Rutgers commit gets an offer from and like it's over is shrinking.
Right.
You can't fault Notre Dame is Notre Dame. You can't fault the young man. But I feel like it's not like, oh, I got an offer from Iowa, I'm done with Rutgers. Yeah. Like I feel like, or Syracuse, like it's that list is shrinking. Like, look.
Well, it was Temple a few years ago. My gosh.
Exactly. It's just like, that's the thing. Like Rutgers, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Ohio State, always going to be playing at a different level.
Right.
And when it comes to this. But you don't want those second-tier teams to be like a destination that you just get dropped like a bad habit.
All right, let's dive into some Rutgers insider questions. Again, NJ.com/insider. Thanks again for subscribing, following, and contributing to the podcast each week. It helps us fill the time. All right, I'm going to go right another basketball question, Fonseca. Do you guys know if Miles Johnson is on track to graduate this spring for his double engineering major? He is such a force and integral part of this team. I'd love to see the band get back together again next year. Fonseca, if you had to guess, Miles Johnson, is he going to finish up and leave, or is he going to stick around?
He's going to graduate. I think he's tweeted about applying to graduate schools earlier in the year. So he's going to graduate. He's going to get into grad school. He's already been accepted to Rutgers grad school.
I bet.
So, yeah, I if I had to guess today, yeah, I think he's coming back to Rutgers. It seems over the summer in his Black Dev, his nonprofit organization, in the bio of that organization, he said he plans on getting a master's degree from Rutgers University. So it seems like the goal for him is to stay at Rutgers and finish out his degree. I've seen no indications that has changed. So yeah, I expect him to be back.
If he left this year, would he get drafted? Is he the kind of kid that one more year in that program would after getting better each year, where he could get into the position where he's getting $1 million contract, guaranteed money?
I don't think he could realistically make an NBA roster because he just doesn't move. He can't play outside of the paint offensively. And as good of a defensive force as he is, I don't know how much that will translate into the league. And I don't even know if that's something he wants to do. Miles is a kid who really has a lot of interests outside of basketball. And I think he's more focused on his career of being, an engineer, one day wanting to work on Silicon Valley. So I would be one, I don't think he'd make it, frankly. And two, I think he'd rather just move on with his life.
All right. Another question about the basketball team. Love Young's energy off the bench, but don't like seeing him at the point. He can be a wild stallion and a turnover machine. Good writing there, questioner. I want more Gio at the point, especially at crunch time. So here's a question for you, Cratch. Who do you think this team is best with? Because they use 3 different point guards. Who is this team's best point guard? This team is at best when that person's running the show.
I think it's Gio.
Yeah.
I mean, Gio's the guy. I think as the season progresses and we get to the nitty gritty, we're going to see Gio more, and it's going to become, they're going to want the ball in Gio's hand in crunch time, taking a big shot. I think that at the end of the day, this is Gio's team. What for how much longer, who knows? But he's the guy who was always going to be tied with Pikel for the rebuild, and I think this is going to be the guy they're going to kind of lean on down the stretch.
Fonseca, do you agree, or can I make a case for when the ball's in Paul Mulcahy's hands? I know everyone's going to touch it, and he's an excellent passer.
I agree. I think he's the best facilitator on the team. I agree with Cratch that the Rutgers is best when the ball is in Gio Baker's hands. He can get you a bucket, down in crunch time when you need it. He moves it well. Yeah, I agree. I think the thing is with Jacob Young, I thought the question was worded perfectly. He's really a boomer bust player where he can, drive and create some magic, hit a layup, but at the same time he'll make a poor turnover or a travel. He has an insanely high usage. He's used 27% of the possessions he's on the floor. Like he whenever he is on the floor and he has the ball, he's going to either take a shot or turn the ball over. So that boom or bust is really something that when games get close, you can't really afford to have. But to answer the question, I think Gio Baker is the best ball. The Rutgers is best when the ball is in Gio Baker's hands.
This is another good basketball question. I love this one. Okay. If you had to choose, who is the player on the current Rutgers roster most likely to be in the NBA, and who is the player most likely to be a college head coach day? I think the answer to the first one is easy. I think the answer to the second one is pretty tough. So who do you got, Fonseca, to those two questions?
Yeah, I think these are slam dunks. I think the Ron Harper Jr. is easily the best NBA prospect on this team.
Really?
Close.
Come on.
Easily.
What about Cliff? The guy's 7'2" with a wingspan that, you mean to tell me that he's not going to get NBA? He's not going to play professionally for 12 years with that body and that skill level?
I never said that. I did not say that. Ron Harper Jr. is he's like at this point, what he's shown, I think he is, obviously he's been slumping, but the Ron Harper Jr. that was there the first half of the season is easily an NBA player. Cliff Montgomery could make the NBA. He has the athleticism, he has the body, he has the size. He has a lot to work on. I mean, he's still very raw, but with his work ethic and the development program that Rutgers has, I have no doubt he will make the NBA.
Cratch, you want to break that tie, or do you have somebody else?
No, I think it's Ron, just because I think that Ron, I'm sure that they'll both make the NBA. Cliff's definitely going to have a cup of coffee there, but I do think Ron is the NBA guy. And the other question was, who's most likely to be a high school basketball head coach?
Yeah, college head coach someday.
I would say probably Paul. That's kind of like the cliche answer. I'm trying to run down the roster.
I just don't think Gio's going to play for a while, or at least overseas, and he seems like he's got more interest outside of basketball as well. I'm trying to think of what Mulcahy's obvious coach's son, not coach's, but obviously comes from a basketball family. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, I think it's easily Paul. I think it's there's no. You listen to the guy talk. He's like a head coach. He every press conference he talks like he's Steve Peichel. Like he has, he's a good basketball mind. And I agree with Cratch. It's cliche, but I don't think it's any close. Walk on Nick Brooks. He's looking to pursue coaching as well. And if you watch games and you see the sideline, he's always either behind the basket or on the sideline yelling out plays and telling his teammates where to go. So I think he might be a sneaky candidate, but I think Paul Mulcahy is easily the most likely.
I also think Luke Nathan would be a really fun college head coach. I would want to play for Luke Nathan.
A good feature there by Fonseca about the incredible energy from the Rutgers bench, and that makes a big difference. And there's actually a good question about it. From another texter. In retrospect, do you believe the current first year class has been a disappointment? Seems to me that it has. I would argue the opposite. I don't think this is a developmental program. They've got a good starting group, and the fact that those guys are so invested in this team and clearly, I don't think there's anybody, at least we're not close to it, but it doesn't look like there's anybody who's griping about not being out there. When they've been out there, they certainly have shown flashes. Do you agree, Fonseca, that the guys on this, that class is not a disappointment?
I mean, I think it's way too early to call them a disappointment, but unless you thought they were going to come in and play, not you, I mean, whoever is addressing, thought they were going to come in and play 25 minutes a game. I can't see this as a disappointment. They had no regular preseason, training camp. They had no 15-game cupcake schedule to kind of ease into Big Ten play. Yep. And they're playing on a team that is a veteran, full of veterans. They have an 8-man rotation who was coming back from last year, and they have a solid group of guys who take the floor. So there's not even many minutes for them to take. Like you said, I don't see any griping about not playing. I think they all understand their roles. They understand that they have still a lot of work to do. And I think they've shown signs of being able to become what Steve Peichel hoped for them to be. It's just a matter of them developing and taking coaching and becoming that.
Okay. We got a bunch of football questions. So is Art Zukowski in the quarterback picture, and what did you think about his performance this year? And the second part to that is, under Schiano, tight ends were prominent, yet seemed mostly invisible this year as they were kept in the pocket to protect with mixed results. Why didn't Schiano address this area, the recruiting or transfer market? Cratch, what do you got? You still think Art's got an outside shot, and where are the tight ends?
I think Art has an outside shot. Look, they haven't added a quarterback, and I think they still might do that after spring practice and when another wave of guys hits the portal. But you really can't count on that. I think one of the things that Rutgers is kind of reckoning with is, even with the offensive success they had this past season, they're not at the point yet where a transfer portal quarterback who's got suitors can say, I want to go to Rutgers. And,
right.
I think a lot of these guys, like, where am I going to go be Gardner Minshew and get to go throw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdown passes and get drafted? Well, no one's looking at Rutgers yet, even though Sean Gleason did a tremendous job kind of getting that offense into a functional, sense. No one's looking there saying, that's the place where I'm going to go and throw the ball a lot and put up a lot of yards and points. So I think they're still maybe a year or two away from really being a strong suitor for these, the top quarterbacks to hit the portal. The tight ends, look, I've written about it a lot. I think it's a major area of weakness for this team. You look back on it, they lost Travis Vokalek to transfer to Nebraska. He hasn't developed into much of a pass catcher there, but he was a tremendous blocker for them this past season. And, I think Giovanni Hassan's a guy who's coming back, obviously. He had some flashes this past season. I think he's a good, solid number 2 tight end. But when you're asking him to do a lot and be that number 1 guy, I think it's a little bit too much. I think it's an area they definitely have to address. They've recruited several young tight ends who are developing. I think that there's only so many tight ends in a transfer portal. And again, it's a finite resource, and other schools are looking for it and have a better case to make. But I do think that's a group that really needs to step up because, obviously Jonathan Lewis just never panned out in the move to tight end. Now he's in the portal. Matt Alimo's a guy who this really hasn't caught on, so I think it was Greg inherited a situation where the tight end room was not great, and I think they made it better bringing Haskins in, but they still have a way to go.
Just to follow up on the quarterback idea, and it's another question from another insider. At what point do you have to have the guy on the roster where you're like, okay, that's the quarterback of the future? At what point do they have to have the recruit they bring in where everyone points to him and says, they finally have gotten the guy that we have identified that they're going to build this offense around? What do you think?
2022 class
Has to be 2022 class.
They have to have the guy, they're doing well with this Braden Davis in Delaware. They have to have the guy.
Is that the guy? You think?
I think he's one of the guys who's in the mix, but they have to have the guy now,
right.
2022. Obviously, it's great if you can add a guy in the portal this spring, summer, but they have to get a big-time quarterback in this 2022 class. I feel like this is make or break for them. And the sense I get from talking to people in the football community is Rutgers realizes they have to get the quarterback in 2022.
All right, one more from the insiders. This is coming off a Keith Sargent story from last week. Other than 250 alumni donating $1 million each, how do you see Rutgers athletic department revenue financial situation being resolved in the next 10 to 15 years? Kratch, you and I have talked about this a lot. I just don't. I think it's either going to be the university waving a magic wand and getting rid of that debt, or I think they're just always going to spend more than they make. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation they're in. Is there a way they can solve this? Because it's not coming from 250 donations for $1 million each.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think that we obviously wrote the story about the athletic internal debt has tripled in the last 2 years. I think it's about $66.7 million. Part of that debt is the Rutgers Center and the APC. So which I would say this, to Rutgers University, those buildings house 4 programs. Only 2 of them, men's and women's basketball, are full scholarship, full head count sports. There's academic services for every student athlete at the Rutgers Center. So I'll be honest with you, I think Rutgers University at some point needs, you have a university, you have athletic teams. It's okay to wave the magic wand and pay for those buildings. Now, look, I understand if you say, no, we're not going to pay for a football-only building, totally get that, or loan from the university bank to build that, get that. But these are buildings that aren't just for basketball or aren't just for football. They're for all your students who compete in athletics. So I think at some point, if the science department needs a new building, I could be wrong, but I don't think they say, okay, well, you got to pay us back $50 million for this building. So I think I've said this once, I'll say it a lot. I think the best way college athletics kind of pivot out of a post-coronavirus world is you take men's and women's basketball and football and the sports that, have a full scholarship package. You spin those off. Maybe at some schools, if baseball is super profitable or hockey super profitable, you can put it there. But everything else should be funded by the university. Because these are kids who don't have full scholarships, who are paying tuition, who are paying housing. It should be on Rutgers. Rutgers should be paying for there to be a baseball team or a gymnastics team, not the football money being used to pay for that. Because football and basketball and women's basketball probably would be relatively self-sufficient with the Big Ten TV check and the concessions and tickets and everything and donations.
All right. We've got a bunch more, but that's where we'll end it this week. As always, everyone, thank you for sending your questions. What else we got, guys? Anything else? Is wrestling ever going to wrestle again? Is women's hoop going to emerge? I mean, what?
Yeah. So, real quick with wrestling, they've back practicing last week. They're on schedule to wrestle at Maryland on Friday, I believe it is. Then 2 weeks off, and then you're going to start the Big Ten Championship. So, as long as everyone gets their 4 bouts, they should be pretty good. The good thing is
they're not going to reschedule those matches.
I do not believe so. No, I think that there's a push because they don't really have to. It's not like basketball where there's a team tournament and you got to have a resume. This is really, they don't really have to do that for wrestling. I think a lot of times in wrestling, you're better off just being in the room and training rather than having a dual meet and making weight and everything. So everyone will get their bouts in. Obviously, we don't know who or has tested positive. The schools aren't releasing that. I guess we'll see what happens. My understanding has been that whatever lineup they put out there on when they wrestle at Maryland is not going to be a lineup that shocks everyone. You're like, oh my God, where is everyone? I don't know exactly what it's going to look like at this point. But even if people tested positive, they should have enough time to go through the protocol and be back for the Big Ten championships. And then it's going to be kind of couple weeks sprint, to see if Sebastian Rivera can win a national title. Obviously, it doesn't look like Nick Soriano's coming back. See how many guys they can get to nationals. With the allocations and the coaches ranking, I think Rutgers could maybe send 6, 7, 8, 9 guys to nationals if everything breaks right. So that should be good. And women's basketball, they're hot. They come back from a month-long break. They won 3 straight. They upset, ranked Northwestern on the road. So they're going to be kind of knocking on the door of the top 25. And I think with a couple more wins, they're going to be easily in the NCAA tournament field.
No, okay, there you go. I completely missed that. I apologize. Fonseca, why don't you give us the last word, since I've obviously not been paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, women's basketball winning 3 games after seemingly having a whole offseason again is very impressive. It's interesting to see teams react to the time off. And you mentioned before, Michigan coming off a 2-3 week break and beating Wisconsin at Wisconsin shows that I guess we might be overestimating how much the long pauses can affect teams. I guess we will see if that will affect Michigan, the second game off its break against Rutgers, but something to watch.
Well, I think the big key is what I'm learning is that not every stoppage is created equally. Like for instance, like wrestling, they pause on like a Wednesday, and the guys who were good to go were back in the room on Monday. Where it seems like women's basketball, they were able to do with the people who didn't test positive and the people who kind of cleared the protocol, they were able to do some sort of activity weeks leading in. I think the big thing too for Rutgers women's basketball is they had a good 2 weeks of real practice, because they had a game that was Michigan's COVID-ish stoppage, kind of canceled one game, and then I think the other game, it was more of a situation with they had a couple injuries in practice they just had to get through. So I think that we're finding out that there's some teams that are completely doing nothing, and there's some teams that are able to do something, and I think those teams are able to kind of get out of the gates quicker.
All right, gentlemen, good show. I appreciate it. We'll be back soon after, and we'll know much more about what's going to happen with this Rutgers basketball season. Steve Politti signing off for James Cratch, Brian Fonseca. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Looking for a new podcast to listen to? Here's what we love, courtesy of Acast Recommends.
Hey, I'm Bert from The Bert Show. You have people on a show that really don't like morning shows.
Stealing an entire school bus, I gotta be honest, that is my dream still.
Why take initiative when you can take a nap?
I like keeping it real and I like keeping it gross.
So we created a show that we really wanted to hear. It's real and it's funny, and we will talk about our personal lives. We're not scared of anything.
Okay, if you want this prize right here, you're gonna have to work for it.
What I love most about this show is everybody's vulnerability.
And though our perspectives may be different, working together is actually fun.
We put the fun in dysfunction.
I think it's unlike anything that you've heard before.
The Bert Show. New episodes every weekday and the weekly top 10 on Saturdays. Listen to this show on Acast or wherever you get your podcasts.
Acast recommends.